And William Albrecht. Welcome back to Hands On Apologetics.
Gary, thrilled to be here with you. Very happy to be able to really talk about Halloween and to talk about maybe, kind of dispelling those really bad perceptions that people may have for the holiday. I can tell you right now that it's definitely a wonderful, wonderful holiday. Now, when do we celebrate it? Clearly tomorrow. Today is the evening, All Hallows evening before that wonderful holy day. Now, have certain secular or liberal media individuals distorted it? As with everything, even when they secularize and commercialize Christmas, everything. But as Catholics, we don't stop celebrating holy days or scrap them merely because people begin to distort the truth. Indeed, what we're going to look at today, we're going to have a great time talking about the roots of Halloween, the historical roots today, and then talking about the importance of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day as well tomorrow. But really, Gary, I think the amazing thing is to immediately realize, look, we know that there are people out there that want to distort the truth, that want to glorify evil, that want to dress up as maybe evil figures and really distort the message of Christ. But what is our goal? Our goal is to glorify God and to recognize that this is a holy day, a wonderful day. And indeed, do not bend the knee to liberalism or to secularism. I can't emphasize it enough. You've written an incredible book on this particular topic and how the secular and liberal world is really just trying to hammer down on us. And, Gary, I got to be very honest. We've got to be very careful. We have to be on the lookout, but not scrap our holy days merely because bad people have distorted what they truly do stand for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, bringing up history, it was Christians that displaced pagan holidays and replaced it with holy days.
Yep.
And, and now it's the course has been changed, and now holy days are being they're trying to stomp them out with their own secular, meaningless holidays.
Yeah.
And it's I think there's a temptation on the part of good, solid Catholics to scrap, any kind of celebration because of what secularism does. But, we got to instead use it to proclaim the true good roots of All Saints' Day and All Saints' Day Eve, right?
Gary, without a doubt, and I really want to, and I know you always, you never tell me ahead of time, but I need to put a plug in for your incredible book, Revolt Against Reality. If people want to know what is going on during these times right now, get a hold of that incredible book that Gary wrote. We cannot bend the knee to liberalism. And indeed, Gary, this is a wonderful holiday. If you stop and think about it, this is an incredible holiday. And if we go to the biblical roots of what are festivals, God tells Moses in the Bible that festivals are holy. They are pleasing and sacred to Almighty God. What we do when we have a festival is we honor God. If we are going to honor God's creation, especially those incredible saints and ask for their intercession, if we're going to honor God's creation, ultimately all honor and glory goes to God. It's very, very clear. And where do we get the basis of having a festival dedicated to the Lord? You get it directly from the Bible. You get it all over the Bible. And as we're going to really dive in here, that is why I love being on with you every time we get together. I love nerding out. We're going to get to the meat and potatoes. We're going to we're going to look at the Bible, early church fathers, and the audience. You're going to have to stick around because we're going to talk about actual documentation that shows us when was the very first time that Halloween was celebrated on these particular days. And Gary, I'm really thrilled because a lot of the times when we break it down like this, our evangelical friends will then kind of lower their guard and say, okay, I can recognize what you're talking about there. And indeed, every year I dress up. Now, I don't dress up as a vampire or a demon or a ghoul. Every year I dress up as my favorite saint, Blessed Duns Scotus, in my opinion, the greatest Mariologist of all time. So there is a healthy way of dressing up, of going trick-or-treating, of giving all honor to God and having fun without glorifying evil. And that is not what we do here within Catholicism. We do not glorify evil. Rather, we glorify him who crushed the head of the serpent and he who defeated death. That is what we are glorifying. And when we honor those incredible saints who, as we're told in 1 Corinthians 9:7, who have finished their race and have their crown, all glory goes to God, doesn't it, Gary?
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, William, I don't know if you caught the beginning of the show, but Halloween's also Reformation Day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And if you think about it, Luther nailed the 95 Thesis on All Saints' Eve, probably because a lot of more people would see it the following day, right? Yeah. And see the 95 Thesis as more public. So he himself was kind of like using the holy day to promote his own agenda, I guess.
No doubt. You are 100% correct. Not only that, I think at times people will look at that and tell other Catholics, hey, we are celebrating Reformation Day. Today, we really are standing against the doctrine of purgatory, of prayer for the dead. Well, I hate to break their bubble, but if they actually read what Luther hammered to the door of the church in Wittenberg, they will read that Luther didn't deny purgatory there. Yeah, right. So really, the idea of standing up against purgatory, no, Luther defended purgatory. What he was against, as you know very well, Gary, was against particular abuses. So, no, I think people need to read that 95 Thesis. They will find it really is not representative of modern-day Protestantism, is it, Gary?
No, not at all. Not at all. Okay, so so how do you want to address this, William? I mean, there's all sorts of points we can start with.
I like beginning right in the book of Leviticus, because the Lord tells Moses, speak to the people of Israel and tell them, these are the appointed festivals of the Lord, that you shall proclaim as holy convocations, my appointed festivals. Why do we begin by pointing out that there are holy feast days, holy festivals, to show you that church has had the practice of feast days throughout the beginning? The solemnity of festivals was made all the more evident when we look in the New Testament. Matthew 26:5 and Mark 14:2. We are told to avoid strife so as to not cause trouble when? During a festival, we're told. But they were saying, not during the festival, lest a riot occur among the people. In Mark 14:2, for they were saying, not during the festival. The Bible is very, very clear. Not only did the ancient Jews have feast days dedicated to the Lord, but the early Christians did as well. St. Paul was very clear about that. And we are laying the groundwork on early feast days, because then we're going to move on to the early feast day of Halloween, or of All Saints' Day. But we lay the groundwork. Why do we lay it? We lay it because it's importantly in the Bible. If our evangelical friends want the very principle of having a feast day, you have it in the Bible. Paul tells you in Colossians 2, therefore, do not let anyone condemn you in matters of food, drink, or observing festivals. And he tells you, these are a shadow of what is to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. I think the most important thing, Gary, to really point out is when Paul tells you the substance is pointing towards the Lord, that is what makes the festival holy in the eyes of the Lord. And we want to be very, very clear. What do we mean by Halloween? As you talked about it earlier, it is the evening, All Hallows Even, All Hallows Evening, before when? Before a holy day, before All Saints' Day. And I'm talking about the early 200s, where we have very, very astute, great early church writer, not church father, church writer, Tertullian, who will begin talking about the holy sacrifice of the Mass being offered for departed. But here's an incredible thing. He begins to talk about the Mass being offered for the departed on their birthdays. And he then begins to say, we offer, and this is in his On the Crown, we offer sacrifices for the dead on their birthday anniversaries. He then noting how the earthly death was merely a passing over into the eternal abode of heaven. Tertullian was really clear the soul could benefit from these prayers. And he then notes that, and each year on the anniversary of his death, the sacrifice is offered. So it's really important because he gives us indication that throughout his tenure in the church, remember, he was one of the very first and most vocal apologists. Sadly, formally left the faith later in life, but early on in his early days of orthodoxy, he was a force to be reckoned with. And he tells us that feast days for the dead were practiced quite often. This is an important factoid because as we go forward in history, we're going to find as we go to different parts of the world. Remember, we're talking about Tertullian, who was I got a brain hiccup there. He was in Carthage. So we're in one part of the world there. And then we go to another part of the world. And in the 4th century, we have an incredible Syriac early father in the great Ephraim, who, by the way, Ephraim is a saint, and he is a deacon of the church. And he begins to talk about celebrations of the dead in his time. Ephraim would talk about celebrations of heavenly martyrs. And his comments were incredible. He tells us in his testamentum, go along with me in Psalms and in your prayers and constantly make sacrifices for me. He then tells people, and these are incredible words. He asks people not to bury him with costly perfumes, but to cover him with prayers and to remember him on the 30th day, indicating that the practice of offering up sacrificial prayers for the saints a month after their birth into heaven was a church practice already, and an incredibly important one. Now, Gary, I stop and I think, isn't that incredible? Ephraim is noticing that there are people who have passed on to the afterlife, and there are loved ones visiting them and taking them flowers, perfumes, and what have you. And Ephraim says, look, hey, shower me with prayers. That is what I need. More than anything else, I need prayers. I don't need any kind of costly perfume because what good is that going to do me in the afterlife? Rather, I need your prayers. And Gary, I think that those incredible words from Ephraim are massively relevant even in today's time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, you have the deepest roots. Of course, you have Ephraim, you have Tertullian, and of course, you also, although it's not explicit about when they, whether there's a special celebration on a particular date, but I mean, you have the veneration of the relics of the martyrs as well, yep. Which it doesn't take that big of a leap of imagination to know that obviously they would do something to honor the martyrs on the day of their martyrdom, right? Yeah, no doubt. And Gary, you do bring up a very good point there because very early on already in the apostolic era, particularly in the writing, the martyrdom of Polycarp, we know already that the martyrs were honored, they were venerated, their relics were taken up. And of course, we get this directly from Old Testament Jewish practices. So you've got it very early on in church history as well. You find it in the biblical Old Testament, then you find it in early apostolic era. So I think you bring up a great point there. If the bones of the relics of the martyrs are being given honor, that is an incredible example as well, and a testimony to the honor and the incredible veneration given to the saints early on. Now remember, we're very early on in history. We're in the 200s and we're in the 300s, and we're reading about martyrs being given honor. But eventually, you have to stop and think, Gary, as you know very well, early in church history, the early Christians were being martyred left and right. In the apostolic era, in the biblical era, they were in danger of death every day. That is why Paul in the Corinthian letter is pretty much just smacking them upside the head and telling them, hey, I'm stuck feeding you like little babies. You're not growing in the faith. And judgment day is coming. He means the end of their life. They're being martyred and killed every day. And Gary, who would know better than Paul, right? He was one of the ones originally killing them. So he knows, hey, we're being killed and martyred every day. And we realize that
it isn't till later in church history, the 4th century, that Christianity, after the Edict of Milan, is legalized. But then there's also another persecution period after the legalization, after the Edict of Milan. So they're being martyred, and eventually you reach a time where what Tertullian and Ephraim are putting forth can no longer really logically work. What do we mean by that? We mean there are so many that have died that we've run out of days to honor particular martyrs. We've run out of them. And eventually you get to the time of the great St. John Chrysostom, who then notes about a festival for all saints. We've gotten to the time where it's virtually impossible to have particular feast days at that time. So to make it much simpler, he begins to talk about a feast for all the saints in the world to have been martyred. But he will then go on to note that not only those that have been murdered, but all of the saints in general. And he then tells you, it's very, very important. He says, martyrdom can be achieved even today through despising luxury, suppressing desire, and giving to the poor. But this is an incredibly early witness and an important one, Gary, because as you know very well, the great St. John Chrysostomus, one of the greatest Greek fathers ever, is recording for us at his particular time in history that not only in his area where he lives, but all over the world, there are now festivals that have been put into place where the early Christians are celebrating all of the saints in the world, not only those that have been martyred. Because remember, before that, it was very common to only have the feast days for saints who were martyred, because very often that was how they were going to die. They were going to get killed. But as history goes on and more Christianity is able to be, the Christians are able to worship openly without having to worry about being murdered, we realize this needs to be opened up to all the saints in the world. And we have that very early on in John Chrysostom. The only unfortunate thing, he doesn't give us an actual date. But that really doesn't matter, because the very emphasis and the roots are right there. And it shows us that having a feast, a festival of all saints was incredibly early.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so it's, it's deeply rooted in the sense that you can really trace it back about as far as you can go. I mean, you have the seeds right there in the New Testament, and then you start seeing the honoring martyrs. It's then honoring martyrs on specific dates. And then from there, it just grows and grows. So the roots go way, way back.